All right, so we talked last time. Jeremiah covered the first part of Micah, which really was the bad news. He got to lay out all the bad things that were going on. And then the second part of Micah is really about the hope, right? And we talked last time that Micah 4 was filled with hope. After 3 chapters of judgment and corruption, Micah lifted our eyes to the coming of the last days, the spiritual kingdom, where nations come to God, where the remnant's restored, where peace replaces conflict, where God reigns forever. And we'll continue that now. We talked briefly last time about what these chapters are about. Chapter 4 was about hope. Chapter 5 is going to be about where that hope comes from, the Messiah, and his nature, his birthplace. Chapter 6, God's going to call them to judgment, to court, so to speak, and make them give an account. And then chapter 7 ends with mercy and hope. So hopefully we'll get through all of that. It's a lot to cover. I think I told Carl I got to cover 2 pages every 5 minutes, and I'm not sure that's going to happen, but we're going to try. And I'm already late. Carl's getting on to me. All right, so we'll move into chapter 5 here, Micah 5. If somebody can just read verse 1 there, Micah 5:1. That's okay, right there. Verse 1 here starts off, it creates this vivid image of humiliation and vulnerability for the people of Israel. They're described here as being under siege by foreign powers. This scenario is not just a reference to a military threat, it's also a symbol. It symbolizes a period when Israel's leaders and people feel powerless and exposed. That phrase, with a rod, they will strike the judge of Israel on the cheek. It's especially important, or maybe important to point out. In the ancient world, I was told, or I read, that striking someone on the cheek was a very, very deep insult, right? It was a gesture of contempt and dishonor, especially when it was directed at a leader. So when you think about someone being struck on the cheek here, and the leader of Israel or the judge of Israel being struck on the cheek here, what's this talking about? Most likely. What's verse 2 going to tell us? Who's this in reference to? Jesus, most likely, right? And you think about the insults. We talk about the striking on the cheek and the deep insult. What happened to Jesus? Right, crown of thorns. There's a lot of pain and agony. There was a lot of humiliation that Jesus suffered, before he was crucified. So Christians today see this prophecy as ultimately fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ. During his trial and crucifixion, Jesus, the true judge and king of Israel, he was mocked, he was beaten, he was rejected by the very people he came to save, and the striking of the judge points forward to these events, highlighting both his suffering and his identification with the humiliated and oppressed nation. So this is referencing Christ and really what's about to happen with Christ. Let's go ahead and move on. Somebody read just verse 2. We are going to read more than one verse at a time eventually, but we're going to start off slow. Verse 2. Anyone?
But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of you shall come forth me, the one to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth are from everlasting.
All right. A couple of questions in our book here. I'll try to ask those as we move along. Question number 7, from what town would the Messiah come? Bethlehem. Specifically, Bethlehem what? I'm going to let you pronounce it. Ephrathah, right? Ephrathah. Do you know Jeremiah? Ephrathah? Ephrathah is how I pronounced it. Question number 8, what does Micah 5:2 reveal about the nature of the Messiah? He's eternal, right? From everlasting, he's a divine ruler. So just a few notes here about this verse, and it's really a verse that's pretty common for us to know when we think about this. Is this verse mentioned anywhere? Probably jumping ahead here, but I'm guessing everybody knows the answer to this. Is it? Is this verse ever referenced anywhere else in the Bible? Fulfilled where? There also, but also in Matthew 2, right? In Matthew 2, they talk about it, and they actually quote this section of Micah. I kind of jokingly said last time when Jeremiah told me I was teaching Micah, I said, that's not a real book in the Bible, because we don't go to it often. It's a flyover book, and that's a horrible term. But it's honestly probably one of the most quoted because of Matthew chapter 2, when they talk about where the Messiah is coming from. But Micah here intentionally, he uses both names, or I believe he intentionally uses both names here, the Bethlehem Ephrathah. Bethlehem, it was a small, insignificant town. There was another Bethlehem that was much larger. So I think he's trying to call out here and trying to be very specific about which Bethlehem Christ would come from, which is even more of a kind of very cool aspect of prophecy, if you will. He wasn't just saying Bethlehem. He was calling out the very specific Bethlehem, this Bethlehem Ephrathah, which also was kind of unique because it was what? Was it a big town? Was it well known? It wasn't, right? It was a small town, not well known, really a place of humility. Little among the class of Judah was what I had in my notes here. This verse talks about Messiah's origins being eternal. That was part of one of our questions. His goings forth are from everlasting. His origins are not merely earthly. The Messiah is both born in Bethlehem and yet pre-existed even before time, which I think is pretty cool because he talks about Bethlehem is where he's going to come from, but he also says he's eternal. So kind of hitting two pieces there, right? He is going to be born somewhere, but he existed even before he was born. So this passage ultimately affirms kind of his divine, eternal nature. We mentioned it was fulfilled in Matthew 2. There, when Herod asked where Christ was to be born, they quoted Micah 5:2. And I was going to read Matthew 2, 1 through 6, but because of time, we're going to keep moving. Does anybody have anything else to add about Micah 5, 1 and 2? Specifically, maybe around chapter 2 or verse 2. Anything I didn't cover? All right, let's move on. Someone read, actually I'm going to read this because I'm going to cut it off halfway through. So Micah 5, starting in verse 3, going about halfway through verse 5. Therefore he shall give them up until the time that she who is in labor has given birth. Then the remnant of his brethren shall return to the children of Israel, and he shall stand and feed his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God, and they shall abide, for now he shall be great to the ends of the earth. And this one shall be peace. I think that's where I wanted to stop. Yep. And this one shall be peace when the Assyrians enter our land, when he treads out on our citadels. So here, Christ is talked about as the Good Shepherd. Something we can also read about over in John 10. It talks about he's our peace. We talked about that last week, Jesus being the Prince of Peace. So the idea here of Jesus as the Good Shepherd, specifically as described in John 10, connects deeply with this prophecy in Micah 5 about a shepherd who stands and cares for his flock in the strength and majesty of God. In John 10, Jesus declares, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. This highlights his sacrificial love and care for his people, ensuring their safety and guidance. Just as Micah foretells a leader who will protect and provide for God's people, Jesus fulfills this role by leading, protecting, and nurturing his followers. Furthermore, Jesus here is described as our peace. In Ephesians 2:14, it says, For he himself is our peace, who has made the two groups one, and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility. So Christ is coming, born in Bethlehem. He's going to be our shepherd. He's going to be our king. He's going to bring peace. Anything to add there? The thing about these minor prophets is there's not a lot of commentary oftentimes from them.
Well, I think it's interesting that in a context of blessing, it tells us that he'll give them up, and labor is an extremely painful process that ends in joy. And so the captivity happened because of their sin, but at the same time, God's sovereignty and mercy is shown in that he can use such a negative circumstance to bring forth such blessings. And the great message, especially
Okay. Pick up in verse 5 where I left off. I'll just pick up 5 again. And this one shall be peace when the Assyrians come into our land, and when he treads in our places, then we will rise up against him, 7 shepherds and 8 princely men. They shall waste with the sword of the land of Assyria and the land of Nimrod as its entrances. Thus he shall deliver us from the Assyrians when he comes into our land and when he treads within our borders. I've got a note here. This is about the deliverance from Assyria. Assyria becomes symbolic for enemies of God's people here. God provides strength and protection under the Messiah. In this passage, Assyria is not just a reference to the historical empire that threatened Israel, but it also represents any and all enemies of God's people throughout time. The use of Assyria as a symbol here helps us understand that the threats faced by God's people are not limited to one era or one nation. They stand for opposition, that stands for opposition in general, whether it be hostile nations, spiritual adversaries, or any force that seeks to harm or oppress God's people. The verses here show that when these enemies arise and enter the land, God does not leave his people defenseless. Instead, he promises to raise 7 shepherds, 8 princes of men, we just read, signifying complete and abundant leadership and protection. This leadership's empowered to defend the people and even to take the fight to the enemy's territory. So there's deliverance that is coming, right? This is what we're talking about here. All right. Somebody read 7 through 9.
Then the remnant of Jacob shall be in the midst of many peoples, like dew from the Lord, like showers on the grass, that tarry for no man, nor wait for the sons of man. And the remnant of Jacob shall be among the Gentiles in the midst of many people, like a lion among the beasts of the forest, like a young lion among flocks of sheep. Who if he passes through, both treads down and tears in pieces, and none can deliver. Your hand shall be lifted against your adversaries, and all your enemies shall be cut off.
All right. So there's a remnant, and this remnant becomes both a blessing, like a dew, and a force of righteousness, like a lion. In Micah's prophecy, this remnant refers to those faithful people who remain true to God even when others turn away. And it's described here, like I just mentioned, in 2 powerful ways. A blessing like a dew. What is that talking about? What's a blessing like a dew? What do you think what does that make you think of?
Moisture give the grass to grow, whatever the moisture goes, help keep the cycle of rain and all that going too.
Okay. Gentle, is there anything that has to happen to make dew happen? Right? Just as dew gently refreshes the earth, bringing life and nourishment to plants, so the remnant brings God's blessing to the nations. That's what I captured here. Their presence is quiet yet vital, sustaining and encouraging those around them. Dew appears without human effort, symbolizing how God works through his faithful people in ways that are gentle, natural, and life-giving. So it's going to come about gentle, right? Like a dew. But what's it also going to come about like a lion, a force for righteousness. And what do you think that's talking about?
People of God being the salt of the earth and, standing out and for truth, the pillar and ground of the truth, which is part of that blessing of dew of the earth, but also, some people don't like salt in their food.
Yeah.
It's not a blessing to everyone, depending on their circumstances and mindset.
Yeah. I mean, it's one thing to live an example. When I think about the dew, I think about it kind of happens and just you're living your Christian life, you're living by example, you're going about and doing your daily thing. There's not a lot of effort that goes into that. But sometimes what happens? Sometimes you got to stand out. Sometimes you got to take a stand. Sometimes you got to speak up. And that's probably the part that we struggle with the most. Is like you said, some people don't like salt, and we know some people don't like salt. And so sometimes it's hard to take that stand. Scott?
It's always so reassuring to hear, and so often they talk about the remnant, and it gives you assurance that you know that no matter how bad things get, you can stay faithful. It's in your capability to stay faithful, because during all that time, there was always a faithful remnant.
Yep. And usually the minority.
It also may have reference to one of the promises to Abraham that all nations would be blessed, when it says the remnant will be spread among the people. the peoples.
Yeah. Yeah, because we just got to reading about that many nations were going to come because of this, so it's a good point. Carl?
Yeah, Jeremiah, go first, Keith.
Jeremiah? Carl said you go first.
I think, coupled with the end of verse 5, it shows us something that it's ironic when you think of it in the context of hearing how other people view Christianity, but the conquering king and Prince of Peace, all the blessings that come from the king, and all the victory and success and positive things in contrast to the negative things like captivity, it's from his power that he's working through his people. He's, whatever those 7, shepherds and princes are, whether it's the apostles or elders in the church, or a combination of any spiritual leadership, and then all this fact that we're due among the people and we're lions, and he's using us. But then he'll go on to say, basically in verses 10 through the end of the chapter, what Paul says in Ephesians 6, your strength is in his strength. You're strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. You're not relying on yourself or your own ability. So it's not a one or the other, that it's all Jesus and none of me, or all of me and none of Jesus. There's they call it synergy in a negative way, but there is a combination of effort, and it's all praise to him, all glory goes to him, but we're involved. He's using us, and that's part of the blessing.
It's kind of off statement, but salt is a preservative also. And with that remnant going where they're preserving also, that's preserving the nation and his people also in the process.
It's interesting. I never thought about that. It's a good way to remember that as well. All right, let's go to the next section here. We're going to read 10 through 15 if somebody wants to read that. Jeremiah stole my thunder, but let's go ahead.
It will be in that day, declares the Lord, that I will cut off your horses from among you and destroy your chariots. I will also cut off the cities of your land and tear down all your fortifications. I will cut off sorceries from your hand, and you will have fortune tellers no more. I will cut off your carved images and your sacred pillars from among you, so that you will no longer bow down to the work of your hands. I will root out your Asherim from among you and destroy your cities. I will execute vengeance and anger and wrath on the nations which have not obeyed.
Yeah. So God's going to get rid of all the fake stuff, right? All the things that they had depended on up to this point, that they had put false hope into, God said he wasn't going to have it, right? It's me and you, to Jeremiah's point. You can't put your heart into those things that are going to be false, like military strengths and idols and occult practices, all that basically represent self-reliance or trying to do things without God, and God's going to cut all that off. He's going to say, nope, those things are not going to be part of your life. Okay? I know we're going through it quickly, but we do have a lot to cover, and I'm trying to get through all the chapters here. So let's move on to chapter 6. So again, chapter 5. Chapter 4 was about hope. Chapter 5, the coming Messiah. We just got through reading that. And then chapter 6 here, some people call this that God takes Judah to court and reveals what he truly wants of his people. So if somebody can read verses 1 through 5 of Micah 6.
Now hear what the Lord says. Arise, plead your case before the mountains, and let the hills hear your voice. Hear, O you mountains, the Lord's complaint, and you strong fountains of the earth. For the Lord has a complaint against his people, and he will contend with Israel. O my people, what have I done to you? And how have I wearied you? Testify against me. For I brought you up from the land of Egypt. I redeemed you from the house of bondage, and I set before you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. O my people, remember now that Balak, king of Moab, counseled, and that Balaam, the son of Beor, answered him from Acacia Grove to Gilgal, that you may know the righteous of the Lord.
All right.
6.
No, just through 5. Thanks, Scott. All right, so Micah 6 begins here with what many call a covenant lawsuit. And it's interesting because it's as if God summons creation itself here the mountains and the foundations of the earth to witness this case against his people. It's a powerful image. God is not just addressing Israel privately, but he's making his case before all creation, emphasizing the seriousness of the charges he's about to bring. And so God's opening question is interesting. It makes me think of being a parent. But, what have I done to you? It's kind of what I think about here. How have I wearied you? God's expressing sorrow. And I think as a parent, sometimes you kind of have felt that. It's like, what have I done to deserve this, right? And that's kind of what God's asking here. Like a loving parent who's confused and he's hurt by a child's rejection. He's inviting his people to reflect honestly on their relationship and reconsider their complaints. And I think sometimes when you say that to your kid in the right way, it does kind of strike them in the heart. They kind of look at it through a different set of eyes, which like, oh, you have feelings too. And that's a little bit of the picture that gets painted here for me when I think about this verse. Like, what have I done to you? Talking about Israel. And then he turns around and he says, and it's one of our questions, I think it's question number 9, what 3 historical events in Israel's history did God recall? Anybody get that?
Brought up from the land of Egypt was one.
Okay.
Well, Balak wanted to do.
When he turned that around, Balak and Balaam.
And established the promised land.
Right. And so it's not only like, what have I done to you, but let me tell you what I've done for you. Right? He brought them out of slavery and establishing them as a people. He protected them from Balak and Balaam when that was supposed to be something bad. He turned it into something good, and then gave them the promised land. These examples aren't just history lessons. They're reminders of the relationship that God has established with his people. His message is clear. I've never failed you, yet you have failed me. God's faithfulness stands in stark contrast to Israel's forgetfulness and disobedience here. So, Jeremiah.
You can kind of read it with a touch of sarcasm too, like a parent saying, "Are you mad because I put food in your belly, and clothes on your back? Like, are you mad because of all the stuff I've done for you? Not just merely, hey, remember the history, but hey, are you rebelling against me because I've loved you so much and done so much stuff you don't deserve?" And it would really, make a point.
Yeah, and it's interesting what their response is. So let's move into that. Micah chapter 6, verses 6 through 8. Somebody can just read those 3 verses for me.
With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before the high God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body, for the sin of my soul? He has shown you, O man, what is good. What does the Lord require of you but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God?
All right. So they respond with these questions that are kind of ridiculous. How many sacrifices do I have to do? How big do those sacrifices have to be, God? How extreme do those have to be? Do you want my firstborn? They show this mindset that they're trying to bargain with God and they just don't get it, right? As if it's a religious ritual or some extravagant offering could make things right here. They don't understand. They're trying to do these things that are external to make God happy, and that's not what God's going to say, right? God's answer here is very simple and profound. He's not interested in these empty gestures of external sacrifices or extreme sacrifices. He wants what's inside, right? And so what does he say? Question number 10 from your book. What 3 things does the Lord require?
To justly love mercy and walk humbly with your God.
Pretty simple, right? Here they're trying to do all of these extreme things and thinking that they've got to go do all these external sacrifices and these extreme activities and try to make God happy. And God makes it pretty simple. Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. You got your hand up, PJ?
Yeah.
I can't tell because you...
Well, it was a cautious thing. But, also when he's, talking to them about this and bringing it up, everything that he has given to them is good for their benefit, and all of even when he brings up the Exodus and all those things, it should also recall that when they got themselves in sticky they don't get it sometimes, and you have to explain it to them or allow them to, end up seeing, and that's, what verse 8 is at the end of the day, it's like, it's not these outward things, I want your heart, and that's the same thing with the child is, you don't want technically these physical things, you want them to be a good person, you want them to succeed in their soul.
Do you have your hand up, Jeremiah?
Yeah, there's a perspective I've not really thought of that I was introduced to just recently. And I preached on Matthew 23 not long ago, and there's an allusion to this language in Micah 6:8 there when he's talking about tithing men, innocent human, and then neglecting the weightier matters of law. And there's a question about the psychology of it, because for us, I think typically we would think, I'm glad I don't have to do these daily sacrifices and take care of these animals in case I sin and I can offer it up and stuff. But I think that if you consider what God's actually wanting, it's a daily life, a transformation, a daily sacrifice, of being conscious about every decision you make and how you treat people, not just selfish. But with the sacrificial system, the way they thought of it was, well, I can do all this hard work and then offer it and then forget about it. Leave your work at work and then go live your life. And that kind of makes sense to me. Like, why are they so, focused on these things and then neglecting what seems to be simple to us? Well, really, it's hard work, but then you just get to forget about it and live your life. And it's almost like a ticket they're punching to get them into a life of immorality. I can do it as long as I do this. And that's not what God wants. He wants us to be transformed like Him.
You can't compartmentalize Christianity, which is what I've heard that said before, and that's what that reminds me of. It's like you can't do these bad things and then ask for forgiveness and set those over to the side and then go do some more bad things and then ask for forgiveness and set those. That's not Christianity.
When you think of like Catholicism or Orthodoxy,
Right.
all the counting deeds and all these little things, like, why does that bring comfort to people? Because they do it, it takes care of it,
Right.
and then they can
Clear
live their life
conscience.
like they've been living their life.
I made a note here too. Jeremiah just briefly mentioned about it, but sometimes I think we overcomplicate, and I want to be careful about how I say this because there's certainly, we have to obey God's rules and His commands and His laws and those things. But sometimes I think we overcomplicate what it takes to be, to live life righteously. And when I read this verse, this do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God, such a simple statement, right? So three kind of very simple things that I can just focus on. If I'm doing those every day, then think about what sins could I do that if I'm not doing those three, that I can save those sins? There's not any. And it makes me think about, it made me immediately think about Matthew 22, verse 36 through 40. Because it reminds me of that also. I think we overcomplicate things in this era of the New Testament as well, which is in Matthew 22, starting verse 36, Teacher, they're asking Christ here, Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And he said to him, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. And they said, This is the greatest and foremost commandment. Or he said, This is the greatest and foremost commandment. And the second is like this, You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang the whole law and the prophets. It's almost like, it's very similar. I thought these were I thought it was kind of stood out to me that there's this very simple verse in the Old Testament, do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. And we have something very similar in the New Testament. Love the Lord your God, and then love the people around you as much as you love yourself. And if you do those two things, then think about what sins can you commit that you could say you were doing those two things? Probably not anything. So I think we oftentimes overcomplicate it by trying to check all the boxes like Catholics and Orthodox and those people like to do, when in reality, we just need to be treating people like we would want to be treated ourselves and love the Lord our God. And if we do those things, most things are going to fall into line. DJ?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the point. What God begs for His people is He wants their heart, and He doesn't want you to walk this line of living on both sides of the fence, Christian and in sin. But when it gets complicated, is people want the benefits of a Christian, and they want to hold on to their sin. And that's where it gets confusing. That's where it gets conflicting. But if you actually purely give your heart to God, if you do justly, that's going to be what you do. It's not going to be a conflict. When you love mercy, you're not going to be searching
Okay. Someone finish chapter 6 there for me. 9 through 16.
The Lord's voice,
Go ahead.
the Lord's voice cries to the city, wisdom shall see your name. Hear the rod, who has appointed it? Are there yet the treasures of wickedness in the house of the wicked, and short measures that is an abomination? Shall I count pure those with the wicked scales, and with the bag of deceitful weights? For her rich men are full of violence, her inhabitants have spoken lies, and their tongue is deceitful in their mouth. Therefore I will also make you sick by striking you, by making you desolate because of your sin. You shall eat, but not be satisfied. Hunger shall be in your midst. You may carry some away, but you shall not save them. And what you do rescue, I will give over to the sword. You shall sow, but not reap. You shall tread the olives, but not anoint yourself with oil. And make sweet the wine, but not drink wines. For the statutes of Omri are kept. All the works of Ahab's house are done, and you walk in their counsels, that I may make you a desolation, and your inhabitants a hissing. Therefore you shall bear the reproach of my people.
All right. So God here is shining a spotlight on the deep-rooted injustices in Israel. Right? He sees through the deceptive business dealings, the manipulation of scales and measures, the violence that fills the city. Their dishonesty and idol worship are not hidden. These actions reflect the legacy of what he mentions here, the corrupt king Omri and Ahab, who led Israel into sin and idolatry. And by following in those footsteps, the people are repeating the very failures that brought them ruin in their past. And then the consequences here that he calls out are not just unfortunate, but they're inevitable. When a society is built on deceit and selfish gain, it's not going to stand. Its foundations are going to crumble, right? What does he say about their labor, right? It's going to fail. No matter how hard they work, their efforts come to nothing. What about their food? It's not going to satisfy, right? Even when they have enough to eat, they're going to feel unsatisfied. Their city's going to fall. The violence and lies that permeate the city will ultimately lead to its downfall, and they're going to bear reproach. Instead of honor and prosperity, they're marked by shame and disgrace before God and others. This passage kind of warns us that sin is enticing and deceives us. It appears to bring satisfaction, fulfillment, but in reality it leaves us spiritually empty. Right? Okay. Any quick comments on that? We're going to move to chapter 7 very quickly. So chapter 7, 1 through 7. If somebody can read that.
Woe is me, for I have become as when the summer fruit has been gathered, as when the grapes have been gleaned. There is no cluster to eat, no first ripe fig that my soul desires. The godly has perished from the earth, and there is no upright among mankind. They all lie in wait for blood, and each hunts the other with a net. Their hands are on what is evil to do it well. The prince and the judge ask for a bride, and the great man utters the evil desire of his soul. Thus they weave it together. The best of them is like a briar, the most upright of them a thorn hedge. The day of your watchmen and your punishment has come. Now for their confusion is at hand. Put no trust in a neighbor. Have no confidence in a friend. Guard the doors of your mouth from her who lies in your arms. For the son treats the father with contempt. The daughters rise up against her mother. The daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are the men of his own house. Is it through 7?
Through 7.
But as for me, I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me.
All right, we're going to go to the Cliff Notes version. So here Micah looks around him, sees a lot of bad, right? Surveys the world around him, and he's grieved by everything that he sees. And some of the statements here that he makes are pretty crazy when you look at them. I was trying to remember the one that I was thinking of. Anyway, I'm going to skip it. But then what does he say in verse 7? But as for me, right? drawing a clear boundary, right? Even if everyone around him had abandoned their faithfulness and integrity, Micah resolves that he is not going to go down that path. He chooses to be faithful, to wait for God, and to trust him regardless of what others do. I think it's a lesson for us today, obviously, regarding the world around us. Does he succumb to his surroundings? Does he fit into his surroundings? Or does he stand out from his surroundings? He stands out. Were you going to say something?
All the things he lists are about, people that should be reliable, loyal people, leaders and such, your own family. But really, when it comes down to it, no one is. The Lord is. And so, even the most faithful of us will, fail other people. But the Lord will never fail us. And so there's a great contrast in there with reliability as well.
Okay.
You're saying don't let your family drag you down. And they can.
Or friends.
Yes.
Or anything around you, right? And I think also don't compare yourself to the world, right? Don't if that's your measuring stick, then that's not the right measuring stick, right? So Micah 7, 8 through 13. I'm not going to read these because I'm going to try to get through some of the comments here. This is basically they're coming. They're confessing. This is the remnant coming up and saying, we hear the heartfelt confession of a faithful remnant here. It's a group who does not deny their feelings, but instead openly acknowledge their sin before God. The honest admission that they have in verse 9, because I have sinned against him. Until he pleads my case and does justice for me, he will bring me out of the light, and I will see his righteousness. I have sinned. It's not a statement of defeat. Rather, it expresses humility and the readiness to accept responsibility for their actions. They recognize that their hardships are not random misfortunes, but the result of God's righteous discipline. And by saying, I will bear the indignation of Yahweh before I have sinned, they demonstrate a willingness to submit to God's correction. And then you get to verses 14 through 17. And I'll just read this. Shepherd your people with your scepter, the flock of your inheritance, which dwells by itself in the forest in the midst of a fruitful orchard. Let them feed in Bashan and Gilead as in the ancient days. As in the days when you came out from the land of Egypt, I will show you wondrous deeds. Nations will see and be ashamed of all their might. They will put their hand on their mouth. Their ears will be deaf. They will lick the dust like a serpent. Like crawling things of the earth, they will come trembling out of their fortress. To Yahweh our God they will come in dread, and they will be afraid before you. In these verses, we see a powerful shift from judgment to restoration. The passage emphasizes that God does not leave his people abandoned after the failures of corrupt leaders. Instead, he steps in to personally shepherd them, reversing the damage that has been done. He feeds them, he protects them, he restores them, he defends them from the nations. Ultimately, judgment's not the final word. God's shepherd care replaces the pain of discipline with the comfort of his presence. It's a beautiful story. And then Micah 7 ends with this climatic ending. Who is a God like you, who forgives iniquity and passes over the transgressions of the remnant of his inheritance? He does not hold fast to his anger forever, because he delights in loving kindness. He will again have compassion on us. He will subdue our iniquities, and you will cast all their sins into the depths of the sea. You will give truth to Jacob and loving kindness to Abraham, which you swore to our fathers from the days of old. So Micah's name means what? Who is like Yahweh? And it ends with asking that question. There is no God like me. There is no God like Yahweh. He forgives. He passes over sin. He has compassion. He subdues iniquities. He casts sins into the depths of the sea. And he keeps covenant mercy. God remains faithful to his promises for all time. That is ultimately the message of Micah. Any comments before they flash the lights at me? Sorry, I had to rush through the last couple sections there, but we did get through it. Thanks, Carl, for keeping me on time. Thanks, everyone.